For decades, the U.S. dollar has been more than just America's currency. It has been the foundation of the global financial system. The currency governments hold in reserve, the medium through which international trade is conducted, and the asset investors rush toward whenever uncertainty strikes. For most Americans, the dollar has always felt permanent, stable, and unquestionable. Yet beneath the surface, a series of economic changes are unfolding that could dramatically alter the purchasing power of the dollar in the years ahead. While many people continue with their daily lives assuming everything is normal, economists, investors, and financial experts are increasingly debating whether the dollar is entering one of the most important transitions in modern history. The first warning sign is the explosive growth of U.S. government debt. Over the last several decades, government spending has consistently exceeded government revenue, creating annual budget deficits that have accumulated into a massive national debt. What makes the situation particularly concerning isn't simply the size of the debt itself, but the speed at which it continues to grow. Every year, the government must borrow more money to fund operations, social programs, defense spending, and interest payments on existing debt. As debt rises, so does the cost of servicing that debt. Eventually, interest payments alone begin consuming a larger share of government revenue, leaving less money available for other priorities. Many Americans assume that because the United States controls its own currency, debt isn't a serious issue. After all, the government can theoretically print more dollars whenever necessary. However, this belief overlooks a critical reality. Creating more money does not create more real wealth. It simply increases the number of dollars chasing the same amount of goods and services. When too much money enters the system too quickly, inflation becomes a natural consequence. The value of each individual dollar declines because there are more dollars competing for the same products. This process has already been visible in recent years. Americans have experienced rising costs for groceries, housing, healthcare, insurance, transportation, and everyday necessities. While inflation rates may fluctuate from year to year, the cumulative impact has been significant. Families who once felt financially secure are finding that their salaries no longer stretch as far as they used to. Savings that seemed substantial a decade ago now purchase far less. The gradual erosion of purchasing power often occurs so slowly that people don't immediately recognize it, but over time the effects become impossible to ignore. Another major factor affecting the dollar is monetary policy. During periods of economic crisis, central banks often intervene by lowering interest, rates, and increasing liquidity in financial markets. These actions are designed to stimulate economic activity, encourage borrowing, and prevent financial collapse. While such measures can be effective in the short term, they also come with long-term consequences. When interest rates remain low for extended periods and money creation accelerates, asset prices often rise dramatically. Stocks, real estate, and other investments become more expensive, creating wealth for asset owners while making it increasingly difficult for average Americans to build financial security. One reason many experts are paying close attention to the dollar is because confidence plays an enormous role in any currency system. Modern currencies are not backed by gold or other physical assets in the way they once were. Instead, they derive value largely from trust. People accept dollars because they believe others will continue accepting dollars tomorrow. Governments hold dollar reserves because they trust the stability of the U.S. financial system. Investors buy treasury bonds because they believe the United States will honor its obligations. Confidence is the invisible force supporting the entire structure. However, confidence can weaken over time if economic fundamentals deteriorate. Large deficits, political instability, rising debt levels, and persistent inflation can gradually cause investors and foreign governments to reconsider their assumptions. This doesn't mean the dollar will suddenly collapse overnight. Major reserve currencies rarely disappear in dramatic fashion. Instead, their influence often declines slowly over many years as alternatives gain acceptance and trust becomes more diversified. Around the world, several countries have already begun exploring ways to reduce dependence on the U.S. dollar. Some nations are increasing trade settlements in local currencies. Others are expanding gold reserves. New payment systems and financial arrangements are being developed to bypass traditional dollar-based channels. While the dollar remains dominant today, these developments suggest that global financial dynamics may be evolving. The process of diversification is gradual, but history shows that reserve currency status is never guaranteed forever. History provides valuable lessons about the rise and fall of dominant currencies. Before the U.S. dollar became the world's reserve currency, the British pound held that position. Britain was once the center of global finance, trade, and economic influence. Yet over time, wars, debt accumulation, and changing economic realities weakened Britain's position. The transition from pound dominance to dollar dominance did not occur overnight. It unfolded over decades. This historical example reminds us that even the strongest financial systems can change when underlying conditions shift. For ordinary Americans, the most immediate concern isn't whether the dollar remains the world's reserve currency. The more practical question is how changes in the dollar's purchasing power affect everyday life. If the value of money declines faster than wages increase, households become poorer in real terms. People may feel like they're earning more income while simultaneously finding it harder to afford basic necessities. This phenomenon can create widespread frustration because the financial pressure feels real even when official economic statistics appear relatively positive. Housing provides a powerful example of this challenge. In many parts of the country, home prices have risen much faster than incomes. Mortgage rates, property taxes, insurance costs, and maintenance expenses have all increased. As a result, younger generations face barriers to homeownership that previous generations never experienced. On the same scale, many Americans assume housing has become unaffordable because of supply shortages alone. But monetary factors also play a significant role. When large amounts of liquidity enter financial systems, asset prices often rise rapidly. The stock market tells a similar story. Over long periods, stock prices have generally moved higher, rewarding investors who remain invested. However, some analysts argue that a portion of these gains reflects currency dilution rather than purely economic growth. If more money is constantly entering the system, financial assets naturally absorb some of that excess liquidity. As a result, rising stock prices do not always indicate that underlying economic productivity is increasing at the same pace. Gold and silver frequently enter these discussions because they have historically served as alternative stores of value during periods of currency uncertainty. Unlike paper currencies, precious metals cannot be created with the push of a button. Their limited supply has led many investors to view them as protection against inflation and monetary instability. Whenever concerns about debt, inflation, or currency weakness intensify, interest in precious metals often increases. While gold and silver prices can be volatile, their role as monetary hedges remains a topic of significant debate among investors. Technology is also influencing the future of money in ways that few people fully appreciate. Digital payment systems, cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currencies, and financial innovations are changing how value moves across borders. Some supporters believe these technologies could create more efficient financial systems. Critics worrying they could introduce new risks, reduce privacy, or alter the balance of power within global finance. Regardless of one's perspective, it is clear that the monetary landscape is evolving faster than at any point in recent memory. One of the greatest misconceptions among the public is the belief that inflation is simply the result of corporate greed or temporary supply disruptions. While these factors can influence prices, inflation ultimately reflects broader monetary and economic forces. When governments spend aggressively, central banks expand money supplies, and debt continues rising faster than economic output, inflationary pressures often emerge. Understanding these relationships is essential because they shape long-term financial outcomes far more than short-term headlines. Ray Dalio and other prominent investors have repeatedly emphasized that debt cycles are a natural part of economic history. According to this view, countries often accumulate debt during periods of prosperity. Borrowing stimulates growth, asset prices rise, and confidence remains high. Eventually, however, debt burdens become so large that they begin constraining economic flexibility. Policymakers face difficult choices involving higher taxes, spending reductions, inflationary policies, or some combination of all three. None of these options are politically easy, which is why debt challenges often persist for extended periods. As Americans look toward the future, the most important question may not be whether a crisis is coming but whether individuals are prepared for economic uncertainty. Financial resilience increasingly depends on education, diversification, and long-term planning. Relying solely on cash savings may expose households to purchasing power erosion over time. Building a mix of assets, maintaining manageable debt levels, and focusing on financial literacy can help individuals navigate changing conditions regardless of what happens to the broader economy. The reality is that most Americans rarely think about the monetary system until something goes wrong. They notice higher grocery bills, rising rent, expensive insurance premiums, and declining affordability. But they may not connect these challenges to larger economic forces. Yet those larger forces are shaping the financial environment every single day. Debt growth, monetary expansion, inflation pressures, geopolitical shifts, and changing global trade relationships are all influencing the future of the dollar in ways that will affect households across the country. Whether the dollar remains dominant for decades or gradually loses influence, the conversation is becoming increasingly important. The warning signs being discussed by economists and investors are not necessarily predictions of imminent collapse. Instead, they highlight structural trends that deserve attention. Understanding these trends allows people to make more informed decisions about saving, investing, spending, and preparing for the future. The unthinkable scenario isn't necessarily that the dollar suddenly disappears. The more realistic concern is that its purchasing power continues declining year after year while most people fail to recognize the significance of the change. Wealth can be transferred silently through inflation. Living standards can erode gradually rather than dramatically. Financial pressures can build slowly until they become impossible to ignore. By the time the average person realizes what is happening, much of the damage may already be done. That is why the future of the dollar matters. It affects every paycheck, every savings account, every retirement fund, every mortgage payment, and every financial decision Americans make. While headlines often focus on daily market movements and political debates, the deeper story revolves around the long-term forces shaping the value of money itself. And if current trends continue, the next decade could become one of the most important periods in the history of the U.S. dollar. The question is not whether change is happening. The question is whether people recognize it before it is too late.